6th, 1996, a mysterious explosion destroys the Chernobyl research facility near Moscow. Lucifer Alpha, a powerful biological weapon under secret development there, is released into the atmosphere, creating a deadly biohazard. Carried by the trade winds, Lucifer Alpha spreads throughout Eastern Europe and Eurasia, destroying 80% of the populace. Half of the world's people die. The greatest biohazard in history later becomes known simply as the catastrophe. But at this time, who could have possibly imagined that the ultimate biohazard wouldn't occur for another half-century? 50 years later, mankind faces its greatest crisis, the appearance of a mysterious android life form. Its purpose and origin are unknown. Is it a new form of weapon? Or perhaps an invasion from some other world? They appear during winter, killing humans and infiltrating society by taking the place of their victims. Employing an artificial skin, they can sweat and even bleed. Part organic, part machine, they're almost impossible to distinguish from those they kill. As they steal their victims' bodies in order to take their place, these mysterious invaders become known as Snatchers. Gillian Seed, estimated age 31. 3 years ago, he and his wife Jamie Seed are taken into protective custody in the Siberian Neutral Zone by the 17th Siberian Investigative Force. Both Gillian and Jamie suffer from severe amnesia. Their memories of events prior to being picked up in Siberia lost in a mysterious mental fog. 2 years ago, after a vain attempt to rebuild their marriage, Jamie and Gillian separate. Following extensive special military training, Gillian is ordered to report to Neo-Kobe City as a junker, effective today.
Snatcher is an adventure game originally released on the PC-88 and the MSX2, and then later ported to numerous other platforms, including the Sega CD version, which I'll be looking at here. Upon starting the game for the very first time, I was totally unprepared for how fast it would pull me in. There's a bit of an introduction as you meet your coworkers at Junker, get your field gear, and then you're thrust into your first mission, which really hits the ground running. I finished the entire game in one sitting, which is a good 8 to 10 hours long, and that's not something I do very often. Because this is an adventure game, there is very little gameplay outside of asking the right questions and finding the right clues. The Sega CD version of the game does include a bit of light gun shooting using the Justifier gun, but it's nothing spectacular and doesn't happen all that often. This lack of gameplay means that everything really rests on the game's ability to tell a story, and it's pretty stellar. As many of you probably already know, this was Hideo Kojima's second game he ever made. It's not really mentioned a whole lot anymore, but fans of the Metal Gear Solid series will likely recognize the homages that were inserted here and there, even if they never played Snatcher themselves. One of the biggest references being that Metal Gear Mark II, your sidekick robot, is in Metal Gear Solid 4 himself, albeit in a somewhat different form. Now, it's true that the game starts off as what one could generously call an homage to Blade Runner, but over the course of the adventure, Kojima does a great job at creating something unique and compelling from something that initially really wasn't. And don't worry, there are still large doses of patented Kojima craziness hiding in here, especially in the third act. Snatcher has been released on numerous platforms over the years, although nothing terribly recent, sadly. However, out of all of them, I personally think the Sega CD version is the best one. It has the best looking graphics with fully voiced scenes, the best selection of music, the best interface, the least amount of cut content, as well as the only official English release. Now, with the English release, there are some changes and cuts that were made, but it really is amazingly intact considering this was released in 1994. Most of the changes are in relation to the abilities for players to make Gillian into a massively perverted creep to the women in the game. These interactions are still present here and there, but they have been cut back, especially in regards to a character that was originally underaged. Other changes include a small tweak to an animated gore scene and change names that were intended to make the experience better for English speakers. For example, Junker originally stood for Judgment Uninfected, Naked Kind, and Execute Ranger, and was changed to Japanese Undercover Neurokinetic Elimination Ranger. Oh, and Gillian was named Gillian in the original because Kojima apparently thought it was cool and didn't know that it was a woman's name, which will forever be funny to me. Another amazing aspect to the English release is the translation and voice work. Most games at this point had fairly terrible scripts that were written by people with poor English skills, while this one is better written than some games are today. Adding the solid voice work on top of that, and you have a release that was unheard of at the time and makes it extremely easy to recommend to people even now. The music in Snatcher was composed by various artists working at Konami, collectively called the Konami Kukeiha Club, and makes up what is most definitely a classic soundtrack. Interestingly, the music differs between all of the versions of the game, with the Sega CD version having higher quality, arranged versions of the PC releases, with some entirely new themes added as well. The later versions of the game, such as the PS1 and Saturn releases, have changed the music almost entirely to the game's detriment. They don't sound nearly as good. This is a soundtrack that is absolutely worth listening to at any time, but I'd say make sure it's from the Sega CD or earlier. Going back to how the game looks, the graphics are all pixel-based, as was the usual at the time, and I think they look damn great. The voice-acted parts are even animated. The gore is another crazy part of this game. While Night Trap was being raked over the coals for its violence, of which it had almost none, Snatcher was out here with graphically eviscerated animals and people's heads blown clean off. Sadly, I think the game being ignored by those nanny groups at the time was because the game was ignored by almost everybody at the time. Despite the effort that was put into the production, Snatcher just did not sell that well. Selling under 20 to 30,000 copies if I remember correctly, making it an extremely expensive purchase these days if you run across one for sale. The exact reasons the game failed are not quite known, but the best guesses seem to be a mixture of the Sega CD itself not being popular, anime-styled games not having much of an audience in the West at the time, and a lack of good advertising. And this is just pure speculation on my part, but I feel like this game bombing was probably part of the reason that such lavish productions on localizing games were kiboshed for years afterward. No point spending that much money and time on something that isn't going to sell that well. Might as well just take off every zig. Overall, Snatcher was quite the ride, and it's well worth the time spent playing it, even if you're not a big fan of text-based adventure games.